I think I didn't do anything wrong. Just followed my heart, even if it meant my lover lost control in public. But when the legal papers appeared on my doorstep, I realized too late that my husband was never the fool I thought he was. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The morning light filtered through our suburban kitchen windows as I packed my gym bag for the third time that week. Malcolm stood at the counter, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision, his teacher's routine as predictable as clockwork. "Another late session?" he asked without looking up, his voice carrying that familiar undertone I'd grown to resent. "Just trying to stay healthy," I replied, forcing brightness into my voice. "You know how important fitness is to me." What I didn't say was how important Cal had become to those fitness sessions. Callum Finch, with his easy smile and genuine interest in my day, had become the highlight of my week. At 31, he possessed the kind of energy that Malcolm seemed to have lost somewhere between grading papers and paying mortgages. "Mummy, why do you and Daddy talk so loud at night?" Nora's small voice cut through the tension as she appeared in the doorway, her 9-year-old eyes wide with confusion. I knelt down to her level, smoothing her hair. "Mommy and Daddy just talk loud sometimes, sweetie. It's normal. All grown-ups do it." Malcolm's spoon clinked against his mug a little too hard. "Nora, go get ready for school." After she left, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. I grabbed my keys, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our home. "I might be late tonight," I said, not meeting his eyes. "Big case at work." "Right, the insurance business is so demanding these days." His tone was flat, but something flickered in his expression. Suspicion, maybe hurt. I chose to ignore it. At the gym, Cal was waiting with that infectious grin that made my heart race in ways it hadn't in years. "Thought you might not show," he said, adjusting the weights on my usual machine. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." We fell into our routine, but the conversation flowed beyond fitness tips and rep counts. Cal listened when I complained about Malcolm's emotional distance, nodding sympathetically when I described feeling like a roommate rather than a wife. "You deserve better, Eulalia," he said, his hand briefly touching mine as he spotted my bench press. "Someone who sees how amazing you are." The validation felt like sunlight after months of cold shadows. When my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, I smiled reading her message. "Take care of yourself first, honey. You can't pour from an empty cup." Vivian Drake had never been Malcolm's biggest fan. She'd always thought I'd settled, married too young to someone too ordinary. Her support felt like permission to want more. That evening, Malcolm's mother Gina called during dinner. Through the speaker, her voice carried its usual warmth tinged with concern. "You two seem distant lately," she said. "Everything all right?" "Just work stress," I replied quickly, shooting Malcolm a look. "You know how it is." "Malcolm works hard too," Gina said pointedly. "Teaching isn't easy these days." After the call, Malcolm's younger brother Tristan dropped by unannounced, his easygoing nature a stark contrast to the tension filling our house. "You guys okay?" he asked, glancing between us. "The vibe here is intense." "Everything's fine," I said, "just the usual married couple stuff." Tristan shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with family drama. "Well, if you need anything." Later that night, as I packed my gym bag again for an early morning session, my phone lit up with a message from Cal. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. You make everything better." The warmth in those words was everything my marriage lacked. I was so absorbed in crafting my response that I didn't notice Malcolm standing in the doorway until he spoke. "Late night gym session." My heart hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get an early start tomorrow." He stared at the packed bag, then at my phone screen. For a moment, I thought he might say something more, but he just nodded and walked away. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I felt annoyed at his suspicion. Couldn't a woman want to better herself without her husband acting paranoid? The local bistro buzzed with Friday night energy as I settled into the booth across from Cal. We'd started meeting here after our gym sessions, innocent enough on the surface, just two friends grabbing coffee. But the way he looked at me, the way our conversations lingered on everything wrong with my marriage, made it feel deliciously forbidden. "Your husband doesn't appreciate what he has," Cal said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "If you were mine..." The fantasy was intoxicating. Here was someone who saw me as desirable, not just as Malcolm's wife or Nora's mother, but as Eulalia, a woman worth pursuing. When Malcolm appeared in the bistro's doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found us, I felt a spike of irritation rather than guilt. Couldn't I have one evening of feeling valued? "There you are," he said, approaching our table with careful steps. I tried calling. "Phone was on silent," I replied coolly. Cal and I were discussing training schedules. Malcolm's eyes flicked between us, taking in our proximity, the intimate way we'd been leaning toward each other. "I see. Join us," Cal offered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was just telling Eulalia how lucky you are." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in passive aggression. Every comment Cal made seemed designed to highlight Malcolm's shortcomings, his predictable routine, his lack of spontaneity, his failure to keep his wife properly entertained. "Malcolm's very stable," I said with a laugh that sounded cruel even to my own ears. "Some might call it boring, but stability has its place, right?" Cal chuckled. "Eulalia needs excitement in her life, adventure. She's too vibrant for a mundane existence." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His silence only fueled my frustration. Why couldn't he fight for me? Why couldn't he show even a fraction of Cal's passion? The following Sunday at Gina's house for our weekly family dinner, the tension continued to simmer. Malcolm's mother had prepared her usual spread, and the dining room filled with the comfortable chaos of family conversation. "Eulalia looks radiant lately," Vivian commented, having driven over to join us. "She's been taking such good care of herself." "The gym is doing wonders," I agreed, catching Cal's eye as he helped himself to seconds. I'd invited him along as my training partner, claiming he had nowhere else to go. Gina's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. It's nice when couples support each other's interests. "Oh, Malcolm's not much for fitness," I said with a dismissive wave. "He's more of a indoor type, books and grading papers, very intellectual." The word came out like an insult. Across the table, Malcolm's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "There's nothing wrong with being thoughtful," Gina said firmly. "Malcolm has always been conscientious." "Conscientious," I repeated with a laugh. "That's one way to put it." Cal leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the show. "Some people are built for excitement, others for routine." Tristan shifted uncomfortably, trying to change the subject to something about his new job, but the damage was done. The room had divided along invisible lines. Vivian and Cal on my side, Gina clearly defensive of her son, Tristan desperately neutral, and Nora shrinking into herself at the head of the table. "Can I be excused?" Nora asked quietly. "Of course, sweetheart," Malcolm said, his voice gentle despite the tension crackling around us. After dinner, as we gathered coats and said goodbyes, Cal walked me to my car while Malcolm helped Gina clear dishes. "You were amazing in there," he murmured, standing closer than necessary. "The way you stood up for yourself." His approval felt like validation. I wasn't the villain here. I was a woman finally finding her voice, refusing to be diminished by a husband who took me for granted. "I should probably head home," I said, though I made no move to get in the car. "Should you?" His hand found my waist, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just us. The spell broke when Malcolm appeared in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by Gina's porch light. Even from a distance, I could feel his gaze on us. Cal stepped back, but not before sending a message that pinged my phone moments later. "You deserve so much more than what you're getting. Think about it." I didn't realize Malcolm had seen the notification light up my screen until we were driving home, in suffocating silence. When he pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, he finally spoke. "We need to talk." But I was already getting out of the car, my phone buzzing with another message from Cal. The conversation could wait. I had more important things to think about. The insurance office buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy, but I found myself distracted, replaying Cal's messages from the weekend. My coworker Janet noticed my frequent phone checks during our claims review meeting. "Hot date," she teased, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Just coordinating gym schedules," I replied, but the lie felt thin. At lunch, I fabricated a story about needing to work late on a complex case, making sure to mention it loudly enough for others to hear. Building alibis had become second nature, each deception easier than the last. "You're so dedicated," my supervisor commented. "Most people try to avoid overtime." If only she knew what my overtime really involved. That evening, I came home to find Malcolm in his study, grading papers with unusual intensity. Nora sat at the kitchen table, picking at her dinner. "Daddy's been quiet all day," she said when I kissed her forehead. "Are you and Daddy fighting?" "Adults sometimes have disagreements, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anything's wrong." But even as I said it, I noticed how Malcolm barely acknowledged my presence. When I announced I'd be working late again the next day, he just nodded without looking up from his papers. "Another big case?" he asked, his tone neutral. "The Henderson claim. Very complex." The lie rolled off my tongue effortlessly. At the gym the next evening, Cal was waiting with his usual enthusiasm, but something felt different, more charged, more dangerous. "I've been thinking about what you said," he murmured as he adjusted my form during squats. "About feeling trapped." I shouldn't have said that. But even as I protested, I leaned into his touch. "You should say whatever you feel. That's what real intimacy is, being honest about what you need." His words felt like permission. When he suggested we grab dinner after our session, I found myself agreeing, despite the voice in my head warning me about lines I was about to cross. The restaurant was dimly lit, intimate in a way that made every glance feel significant. Cal listened as I vented about Malcolm's emotional withdrawal, his increasing distance, his failure to fight for our marriage. "He's controlling," Cal said, nodding sympathetically, "making you feel guilty for wanting more from life." "Exactly." The validation felt intoxicating. "He acts like I'm the problem for wanting to feel alive again." "You're not the problem, Eulalia. You're the solution. You just need someone who recognizes your worth." When he reached across the table to take my hand, I didn't pull away. Meanwhile, at home, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Gina called more frequently, her conversations with Malcolm taking on a conspiratorial tone that set my teeth on edge. "Your mother-in-law seems very concerned about our marriage," I commented after overhearing one of their discussions. "She cares about our family," Malcolm replied simply. "She cares about controlling it, just like you." The accusation hung between us like a blade. Malcolm's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A hardening, a resolution I'd never seen before. "I'm not controlling you, Eulalia. I'm just paying attention." The words sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was the victim here, not him. At work, my mother called during lunch break, her voice bright with curiosity. "How are things with Malcolm? You sounded frustrated last time we talked." "He's being overbearing," I confided, "questioning everything I do, making me feel like a prisoner in my own life." "That's not healthy, honey. A man should trust his wife. Maybe he's feeling insecure about something." Her words felt like ammunition. Yes, Malcolm was insecure, threatened by my growth, my newfound confidence, my refusal to remain the docile wife he'd taken for granted. That evening, Tristan stopped by unannounced, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued. "Everything okay with you and Malcolm?" he asked when we were alone in the kitchen. "Why does everyone keep asking that?" "Because he looks like someone died, and you look like you're about to run away from home." His bluntness caught me off guard. Marriage is complicated, Tristan. Yeah, but it shouldn't look like warfare. After he left, I found Malcolm in his study again, but this time he wasn't grading papers. He was reading something in a manila folder, his expression grim and focused. "What's that?" I asked. He looked up, and for a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Not hurt, not anger, but calculation. "Just work stuff," he said, closing the folder and sliding it into his desk drawer. But later that night, after he'd gone to bed, curiosity got the better of me. I crept into his study and opened the drawer, my heart pounding as I rifled through the contents. What I found made my blood run cold. Legal documents, divorce papers, partially filled out, bank statements with highlighted entries, phone records, a business card for a private investigator. Malcolm wasn't the passive wounded husband I'd thought him to be. He was building a case, and I was the defendant. The bistro felt different that Friday night, charged with an energy I couldn't quite name. Cal had suggested we meet with a few of his friends, making it feel more like a group outing than our usual intimate dinners. I'd agreed eagerly, hungry for the social validation his circle provided. "Eulalia's the one I was telling you about," Cal said to his friend Marcus as I slid into the booth beside him. "The one with the husband who doesn't appreciate her." Marcus laughed, raising his beer. "Two unappreciated wives and the men smart enough to notice them." The toast felt like a coronation. Here, surrounded by people who saw me as desirable and worthy, I felt more alive than I had in years. When Cal's arm draped casually around my shoulders, I leaned into the contact instead of pulling away. "You seem different tonight," observed Sarah, one of Cal's gym colleagues. "Confident. It's a good look." "I'm finally learning to put myself first," I replied, the words feeling like a manifesto. We were deep in conversation about life choices and settling for less when I spotted Malcolm entering the restaurant. My stomach dropped, but not from guilt, from annoyance. Couldn't I have one evening without his suffocating presence? He approached our table with measured steps, his teacher's composure intact despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. "Eulalia," he said simply, "we need to go. Nora's asking for you." "Nora's fine," I replied without moving from Cal's side. "She's at your mother's, remember? She's upset. She wants her mother." The group fell silent, watching our domestic drama unfold like a dinner theatre performance. I felt their eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd handle this interruption to my evening. "Malcolm, you're being dramatic," I said, my voice carrying further than intended. "Nora is perfectly safe with Gina. You're just trying to ruin my night because you can't stand seeing me happy." Cal's arm tightened around my shoulders in a show of support. "Maybe you should call first next time, man. Barging in on people isn't cool." Malcolm's gaze shifted to Cal, and something dangerous flickered in his expression. "I wasn't talking to you." "Well, you're talking to my friend," Cal said, rising from the booth. At 6'2", he had a few inches on Malcolm, and he used every bit of that advantage. "And she doesn't want to go with you." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Other diners had started to notice the confrontation, phones discreetly appearing as people sensed drama brewing. "This is between my wife and me," Malcolm said, his voice still controlled but carrying an edge I'd rarely heard. "Your wife is a grown woman who can make her own choices," Cal shot back. "Maybe if you treated her better, she wouldn't need to find appreciation elsewhere." The words hung in the air like a confession. I saw Malcolm's face change, saw the moment he fully understood what had been happening right under his nose. "Cal," I warned, but part of me thrilled at his defense of our relationship. "No, Eulalia, you don't have to pretend anymore." Cal turned back to Malcolm, chest puffed with righteous indignation. "She deserves better than a man who takes her for granted." "Is that what you think you're providing?" Malcolm asked quietly. "I think I'm providing what you can't. Attention, appreciation, passion, everything she's been missing in your boring little marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Malcolm's hands clench and unclench at his sides, watched him struggle with emotions I'd never seen him display so openly. "You're right," he said finally. "I have been taking her for granted." For a moment, I thought he might actually fight for me, might show the kind of passion Cal claimed he lacked. Instead, he stepped back. "Enjoy your evening," he said, and turned to leave. But Cal wasn't finished. The adrenaline, the audience, the chance to play hero, it all combined into a moment of spectacular poor judgment. "That's right, walk away," he called after Malcolm. "Just like you've been walking away from your responsibilities as a husband." Malcolm stopped, his shoulders rigid. "Cal, don't," I said, suddenly sensing how badly this could go wrong. But Cal was on a roll, drunk on his own righteousness and the attention of our audience. She needed a real man to show her what she was worth. When Malcolm turned around, his face was a mask I didn't recognize, but instead of the explosion I expected, he simply pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Calling the police," he said calmly. "This gentleman seems agitated, and I'm concerned about public safety." "You can't be serious," Cal sputtered. "I'm very serious. You've made threats, you're intoxicated, and you're causing a disturbance." That's when Cal snapped. Maybe it was the humiliation, maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the realization that his grand gesture was backfiring spectacularly. Whatever the reason, he lunged forward and shoved Malcolm hard in the chest. Malcolm stumbled backward, catching himself against a nearby table. The restaurant erupted in gasps and the scraping of chairs as people either fled or moved closer to film the altercation. "Cal!" I screamed, but he was beyond reason now. "You think you can humiliate me?" he shouted at Malcolm. "You think you can call the cops on me?" But Malcolm wasn't fighting back. He straightened his shirt, picked up his phone from where it had fallen, and walked calmly toward the exit. "Sir, you need to stay," called one of the waitstaff, clearly shaken by the violence. "I'll be outside," Malcolm replied without turning around. "The police are on their way." As the sirens grew closer, I watched Cal's bravado crumble into panic. The man who'd promised to show me what I was worth was now looking around desperately for an escape route. "This is your fault," he hissed at me. "You said he was weak." The accusation hit like a slap. Around us, phones captured every moment of our public humiliation, and I realized with growing horror that this scene would follow me forever. When the police arrived, they found Malcolm waiting calmly outside, his statement clear and factual. Cal, meanwhile, reeked of alcohol and aggression, his version of events contradicted by a dozen witnesses and several phone videos. As they led Cal away in handcuffs, he shot me a look of pure betrayal. "This isn't over, Eulalia. You owe me." But I was beginning to suspect that the only person I owed anything to was myself, and I'd just destroyed any chance of collecting on that debt. Malcolm drove past me in the parking lot without stopping, his face invisible behind the windshield's reflection. For the first time in months, I felt truly alone. The morning after the restaurant incident, I woke to find Malcolm already gone, and a note on the kitchen counter. "Staying at my mother's for a few days. We'll talk when I'm ready." The house felt different without his presence, not liberated as I'd expected, but hollow and somehow threatening. Nora padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, her eyes puffy from crying. "Why did Daddy leave?" she asked, climbing onto my lap. "He just needs some space, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need to think about things." But even as I comforted her, my phone was buzzing with notifications. The restaurant incident had gone viral in our small town's social media circles. Videos of Cal shoving Malcolm, of me sitting frozen in the booth while my lover was arrested, had been shared dozens of times. The comments were brutal. "Imagine humiliating your husband like this in public. That poor man. He handled it with such class. She's been cheating with that trainer for months. Everyone at the gym knew." I tried calling Malcolm, but his phone went straight to voicemail. When I drove to Gina's house, she answered the door with an expression that could have frozen hell. "He doesn't want to see you," she said simply. "He's my husband. We need to talk about this." You should have thought about talking before you decided to destroy your marriage in front of half the town. The door closed in my face with quiet finality. At work, Monday morning, the whispers followed me down every hallway. My supervisor called me into her office before lunch, her expression professionally neutral, but her discomfort obvious. "Eulalia, I need to ask about your overtime claims from last month." My blood turned to ice. "What about them?" HR flagged some discrepancies. "You claimed 47 hours of overtime, but your keycard shows you left the building at normal times on most of those days." The walls seemed to be closing in. "There must be some mistake, maybe the keycard system." "We also checked with the Henderson case you mentioned. There is no Henderson case." The lie I'd built my alibis on crumbled like sand. "I can explain. I think you should take some personal time to sort out your situation. We'll discuss your employment status when you return." I stumbled home in a daze, finding an envelope wedged in my front door. Inside were divorce papers, meticulously prepared and comprehensive in their scope. Malcolm wasn't just leaving me, he was dismantling our life with surgical precision. The custody arrangement hit me like a physical blow. He was seeking primary custody of Nora, citing my unstable behavior and poor judgment as grounds. Bank statements were attached, highlighting every suspicious transaction. The hotel receipts when Cal and I had finally crossed the line, the expensive dinners I'd claimed as work expenses, the gym membership I'd upgraded to spend more time with him. My phone rang. Vivian's voice was sharp with panic. "Eulalia, what's this about divorce papers? Malcolm's lawyer called me asking about character witnesses." "He's trying to take Nora away from me," I said, my voice breaking. "He can't do that. You're her mother." But even as she said it, I could hear the doubt creeping in. The evidence Malcolm had compiled painted a picture of a woman who'd abandoned her family for a selfish affair, who'd lied and manipulated to cover her tracks. Tristan showed up that evening, his usual easy demeanor replaced by something harder. "I tried to stay neutral," he said without preamble. "But Malcolm's my brother, and what you did to him, I didn't mean for it to happen this way." "You didn't mean to get caught," he corrected. "There's a difference." After he left, I called Cal, desperate for some ally in the chaos consuming my life. The number went straight to a disconnected message. When I drove to his apartment, I found it empty, a "for rent" sign already posted in the window. He'd vanished, leaving me to face the consequences of our affair alone. The next morning brought another envelope, this one delivered by a process server, who seemed apologetic but determined. Inside were restraining order documents, not against me, but against Cal, should he return. Malcolm had been thorough, protecting himself and Nora from any future harassment. But the most devastating document was the last one. A formal request for an emergency custody hearing, citing my continued contact with a violent individual and pattern of deceptive behavior endangering the child's welfare. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I tried reaching out to friends, to family members, to anyone who might testify on my behalf, but the restaurant incident had poisoned the well. Even people who'd once enjoyed my company now saw me as the woman who'd humiliated her devoted husband in public. "I don't want to get involved," was the common refrain. "This is between you and Malcolm." Only my mother remained steadfast in her support, but even Vivian's loyalty couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence Malcolm had assembled. "He's been planning this for months," she said after reviewing the documents. "Every bank statement, every phone record, every lie you told, he documented all of it." "I thought he was just being distant," I whispered. "I thought he'd given up on us." "He was building a case, and honey, it's airtight." The man I'd dismissed as weak and passive had been anything but. While I'd been playing games and seeking validation, he'd been methodically protecting his interests and his daughter's future. The irony was devastating. In seeking to escape what I saw as Malcolm's control, I'd handed him complete power over my life. The courthouse steps felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. My lawyer, hastily hired and clearly overwhelmed by the evidence against me, tried to prepare me for what was coming. "The best we can hope for is joint custody with supervised visitation," she said, reviewing her notes one final time. "His documentation is extensive." Inside the courtroom, Malcolm sat with his attorney, his posture calm and professional. He'd worn his best suit, the one I'd bought him for parent-teacher conferences, and his hair was freshly cut. He looked like exactly what he was, a responsible father and educator seeking to protect his child. I, on the other hand, felt like a defendant in my own life. Judge Harrison reviewed the case files with methodical precision, her expression neutral, but her questions pointed. When she asked Malcolm to present his evidence, he did so without emotion or vindictiveness, just facts, dates, and documentation. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit A, bank statements showing unauthorized charges to hotels and restaurants during times my wife claimed to be working overtime. The statements were projected on a screen for all to see. Every clandestine dinner with Cal, every afternoon we'd spent in hotel rooms, reduced to line items in a financial record. Exhibit B, phone records showing extensive communication with Mr. Callum Finch during work hours and family time. Hundreds of texts, calls that lasted hours, a digital trail of my emotional affair laid bare. Exhibit C, employment records from my wife's workplace, showing discrepancies between claimed overtime and actual time spent in the office. My web of lies unraveled in real time, each deception exposed and catalogued. But it was Exhibit D that broke me entirely, a recording from Nora's school counselor. "She's been acting out for months," the counselor's voice filled the courtroom. "Difficulty concentrating, emotional outbursts, repeatedly asking why her parents fight so much. She's clearly been affected by instability in the home." I wanted to object, to explain that I'd been trying to find happiness for all of us, but my lawyer's warning look kept me silent. When it was my turn to present my case, I felt exposed and desperate. My testimony sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Claims of emotional abandonment that rang false against Malcolm's documented devotion to our daughter. Accusations of control that seemed petty compared to his measured response to my betrayal. "Mrs. Harker," Judge Harrison said when I finished, "do you have any evidence to support your claims of emotional abuse or neglect?" I looked at my lawyer, hoping for some lifeline, but found only resignation in her expression. "No, Your Honor, but marriage is complicated, and sometimes—" "Mrs. Harker, this is a custody hearing, not marriage counseling. I need evidence, not explanations." The final blow came when they called Gina as a character witness. Malcolm's mother took the stand with quiet dignity, her testimony devastating in its simplicity. Malcolm has always been a devoted father. Even when his marriage was falling apart, he never missed a school event, never forgot a bedtime story, never let his personal pain affect his parenting. Nora adores him, and he's the stable presence she needs right now. "And Mrs. Harker?" the judge asked. Gina's pause spoke volumes. "I believe Eulalia loves her daughter, but love isn't always enough. Children need consistency, honesty, and adults who put their welfare first." When Vivian took the stand in my defense, her testimony felt desperate and unconvincing. She painted Malcolm as controlling and emotionally distant, but when pressed for specific examples, she had nothing concrete to offer. He never seemed passionate enough for my daughter. She needs excitement in her life." "Mrs. Drake," Judge Harrison said dryly, "we're determining custody arrangements, not marriage compatibility." The judge's final questions were directed at me, and they cut to the heart of everything I'd tried to justify. "Mrs. Harker, you've admitted to an extramarital affair, to lying about your whereabouts, and to exposing your child to public conflict and violence. Can you explain how these actions serve your daughter's best interests?" I opened my mouth, desperate to find words that would save me. but nothing came. How could I explain that I'd been trying to save myself without admitting that I'd sacrificed my family in the process? I was unhappy, I finally whispered. I thought I deserved more. And what about what your daughter deserved? The question hung in the air like a judgment. Around me, the courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's pen and the whisper of papers being shuffled. Judge Harrison's decision was swift and comprehensive. Primary custody to Malcolm, with supervised visitation for me until I could demonstrate stability and commitment to Nora's welfare. The family home would remain with Malcolm to provide continuity for our daughter. My access to joint accounts was restricted pending a full financial audit. This court's primary concern is the best interests of the child, Judge Harrison concluded. Based on the evidence presented, those interests are best served by awarding primary custody to the parent who has demonstrated consistent stability, honesty, and commitment to the child's welfare. As the gavel fell, I felt my life shatter like glass. Malcolm gathered his papers with the same methodical care he brought to everything, his victory complete, but without triumph. He looked at me once across the courtroom, and I saw not anger or satisfaction, but something worse, pity. Gina embraced her son as they left, whispering words of comfort I couldn't hear. Vivian sat beside me, her own shock evident as the reality of our defeat sank in. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was over. The man I'd underestimated had outmaneuvered me completely, using my own choices as weapons against me. Cal was gone, vanished like smoke the moment real consequences appeared. My job was in jeopardy, my reputation destroyed, my daughter lost to me except for court-supervised visits. As I walked out of the courthouse alone, I realized the terrible irony of my situation. I'd sought freedom from what I saw as Malcolm's constraints, only to find myself trapped in a prison of my own making. The tables hadn't just turned. They'd been flipped entirely, and I was buried beneath the wreckage of the life I'd thrown away. The woman who'd thought she deserved everything had ended up with nothing at all. 6 months later, I sat in the supervised visitation center, watching Nora color at a small table while a court-appointed monitor observed from the corner. My daughter was polite but distant, our conversation stilted and careful. "How's school?" I asked. "Good. Daddy helps me with my math homework." "That's nice, sweetheart." She didn't mention missing me, didn't ask when I was coming home. Malcolm had provided the stability she needed, and she was thriving in ways that both comforted and devastated me. Through the window, I could see him waiting in the parking lot, reading a book while he waited for our hour to end. He'd grown a beard and looked younger somehow, as if removing me from his life had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd placed there. Cal had never returned. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to another state, found a new gym, probably a new married woman to pursue. The promises he'd made, the future he'd painted for us, had evaporated the moment real consequences appeared. My job was gone, my friends scattered, my family relationships strained beyond repair. The house I'd once shared with Malcolm and Nora had been sold, the proceeds divided according to the divorce settlement that favored the parent who'd remained faithful and responsible. I lived now in a small apartment across town, working part-time at a call center while I tried to rebuild some semblance of a life. The woman in the mirror looked older, sadder, marked by choices that couldn't be undone. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd fought for my marriage instead of abandoning it. If I'd talked to Malcolm about my feelings instead of seeking validation elsewhere. If I'd remembered that happiness isn't something you find, it's something you build, day by day, choice by choice. But wondering was all I had left. The tables had turned completely, and I was learning to live with the view from the bottom. As our visitation ended, and Nora hugged me goodbye, a brief, obligatory embrace, I watched her run to Malcolm's car with the enthusiasm she'd once shown me. He helped her with her seatbelt, asked about her coloring, made her laugh with some joke I couldn't hear. He was the parent she needed. I was just the cautionary tale she'd hopefully never fully understand. The woman who thought she deserved better had discovered too late that she'd already had the best thing in her life, and now it belonged to someone else. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.